first question to you is what is algorithmic bias?
Algorithmic bias is a phenomenon by which machine learning, which is the basic engineering process that enables us to create advanced technologies like AI, ends up being trained in such a way that it expresses the same biases, whether that's racism or sexism or casteism or any of the isms, homophobia, as we find in wider society. And a really good example of that here in the US was during COVID. There was an algorithm that our hospital systems were using in some states to decide who got beds, right? Everybody's ill, it's a pandemic, people are in hospital, they're dying. We don't want humans to do it because humans have bias. Let's get the algorithm to do it. And what ended up happening were millions of Black people were discriminated against in the hospital setting because the algorithm was engineered to assign beds to people who cost less to the health system. The idea being we're spending all of this money on health expenditure, let's get cheaper patients.
Yep.
And those patients tended to be white patients, richer patients, because they already had access to healthcare.
Yep.
So when they showed up, they weren't as sick. And that's an example of how an algorithm has made a racist assumption in that case.
Wow, that's interesting in so many different ways. And my next question would be, how do you think we can circumvent adding this kind of biases to an algorithm and to balance out the biases that we add to these algorithms, because most of the time they're invisible, and it is possible that these biases are being added to the algorithm unintentionally. So my question to you would be, how can we circumvent that from happening?
I would agree. I would say that the way biases become engineered into systems isn't because engineers are terrible people that want to discriminate. It's because part of engineering, for folks who are engineers know this, but people listening who aren't, you have to make decisions. Are you going to use this input or that input? Is it easier to get the data? Is there more publicly available data? Or are we going to have to spend resources to get these other data sets? And it's been a really interesting journey. Google here in the US was under huge fire because they were trying to take the biases out of a facial recognition algorithm.
Yeah.
And the way that they did that was by going into communities where there were lots of people with dark skin who were homeless, and then offering them $5 to take a picture of their face. That's a lot of other problems because people do not have consent. They're already vulnerable, that you're capturing their data. So the point I'm making is that when we're trying to de-bias algorithms, we can actually create more problems that are based. So I always advocate, and the reason AI for the People is such a huge supporter of policy intervention, is that we need to develop minimum standards by which our technologies should be functional and not release them unless they are functional. We do a lot of work with the UN where we think about human rights impact assessment as being a vehicle by which algorithms can be less biased. So not going to the engineering, but saying here in the quality assurance process, let's actually test how this works. And if it has an impact on already traditionally marginalized groups more than other groups, then let's either not release the algorithm, let's use the technology differently, or let's repurpose the technology because the legal implications are too great at that point.
On that point, I have another question because, as you can imagine, any innovation in AI is becoming more and more difficult, and it's such a competitive field. And of course, every company wants an competitive advantage which means time is a really big constraint here. And what you're saying is that to assess the impact on different groups, you need to assign some, some man hours and then some amount of monetary incentive there to sort of make it for the impact assessment. So how do you think the process would be beneficial for the company as well, and also for the community or group of people who the AI is supposed to serve?
I think it has to come through tax incentives. So one of a great way to make a company be good is to offer that company money. So if you either mandate through law, which is one approach, we already have in most countries, you can't just release medicine into the marketplace. There is some type of government regulation and certification that medicine needs to go through. So developing something similarly for the algorithmic actors. But we also have to really appreciate that we're in an arms race too. So it's not just that we're in a technology race. We are actually in a race to think about who is going to be the most powerful nation. And it's traditionally been the United States and China. India is now coming into that mix. They have more young people. They have more educated people. If you look at the US tech sector, Indian CEOs are leading our largest companies.
Absolutely.
People of and so between these three powers, we need to make sure that we can incentivize people across the globe to do this. Because if America starts to develop these really good, slow algorithms, but China and India are developing much faster and get ahead, that's not going to be good for foreign policy, and the other way around. And so what we always say is that across the board, those companies, with the exception of China, which is a communist state, but it's like a capitalist communist state, different podcast. I can talk about it later. But, with India, which is a democracy, we can go hopefully and this is again the UN, using vehicles like the UN and saying, look, you're going to have to give these people tax breaks. And use that as an incentive to shape this behavior.